Welcome to Slash Forward. In this episode, we're going to facilitate an intermediate class in meltation with the 1988 remake of the Blob. Let's get to it. We open in space, the final frontier, and then swoop down to a sleepy town apparently dead in the off-season, overrun by cats and devoid of folks. Oh, there they are. They're enjoying a rousing game of American-styled football, where boys go to talk about chasing tail and engage in crushing skulls. Out at the old gorge, we find badass Brian Flagg trying his damnedest to be a big boy, zooming around on his vroom vroom like some sort of Knievel. However, a clogged carburetor prevents him from fully grabbing life by the dick. In some more scene setting, we find Sheriff Herb at the diner asking Fran out that evening, right before the after-game crowd rolls in. Wound up, he lets off some of his sexual frustration on Flagg, pointing out that his upcoming 18th birthday means his ass belongs to the sheriff. But he's completely unfazed. I mean, you don't grow a curly mullet like that if you give a shit what other people think about you. He heads to the shop to engage in blue-collar banter about the possibility of a good winter, and to borrow a ratchet set to repair his bike. That evening, Paul and Scott are preparing for a hot date, when Scott is descended upon by a very reverendly man of the cloth.
You want the ribbed or the regular?
Embarrassed by this turn of events, he tries to convince the pharmacist the purchase is for shy Paul. After Meg's brother Kevin leaves with his friend Eddie, Paul shows up and she introduces him to her father, now staring in the eyes of the sex fiend dating his daughter. Meanwhile, out in the woods, the town scavenger witnesses a meteor touchdown. So he goes to the site and gets out his poking stick, discovering the space rock to be filled with goo, which latches to his hand. He screams and tries to axe his hand off to be rid of it. This is witnessed by Flagg, who was out in the woods cranking on his hog. He runs off, bringing them all together when the poor chap is struck by Paul's car. The boys have a standoff about insurance claims and comparative negligence, ultimately deciding it's best to stick together in the event they have to do some splaining later. When they check in at the hospital and Flagg realizes no one gives a crap, he takes off. Later, Paul goes to acquire a tasty beverage and thinks he sees something strange. When he confirms the strangeness, he urgently calls the doctor, who checks the patient's pulse and then diagnoses him with missing the entire lower half of his body. Paul calls the sheriff and names the involved parties, only realizing too late that he's about to get gooped, the results of which are witnessed up close by Meg. She gets the vapors, but lucks out and wakes up, undigested. The sheriff likes Flagg for the crime of the missing murder victim, details being scant due to Meg's shock, so he's brought in for questioning. Meg is taken home and put to bed, but she's upset that no one believes her account of the events. As a result, she palms the pill and sneaks out. Flagg is briefly interrogated, but demonstrates a complete mastery over the emotional state of the deputy. With no evidence or motive, Herb humbles his deputy by making him cut Flagg loose. Meg then comes around looking for a sympathetic ear, eventually following Flagg into the diner. In the kitchen, a persistent clog requires more direct intervention from the line cook, resulting in the gang walking in on an absolutely mind-boggling scene. Flagg and Meg run to the walk-in, finding the cold to be their salvation. Fran rushes down an alley to what historians refer to as a phone booth. She calls Herb, but he's already there, and the Blob breaks into the booth, turning it into the colon in which she dies. We get a brief intervening shot showing the Reverend checking the damage at the diner and snagging a couple of samples. They find the sheriff's office in disarray, so they head to the last place the deputy was going. While out, they run across some friendly government biological containment specialists out for an evening hike. We find they're initiating a full quarantine protocol before Dr. Meadows decides to regale them with a story.
The dinosaurs ruled our planet for millions of years.
Oh my, Blob, hurry up! He confirms that they suspect a germ-bearing meteor has touched down, but Flagg confirms this ain't no simple bacterium, and we get further confirmation of this when the projectionist is assimilated. They're ushered into a safety van, but Flagg's not buying their good intentions, so he busts out. Back in town, the cattle call is in full swing. Meg reunites with her parents, but discovers Kevin's still missing. Her dad lays down a classic "my taxes pay your salary" distraction, allowing her to skitter off. She arrives right as the movie lets out and bears witness to all sorts of unspeakable horrors before finding the boys. On their way out, Kevin gets his jacket stuck like a total dork, and they barely break free. Then they hit a dead end and submerge into the catacombs. In the woods, Flagg sees the meteor is actually a UFO, which is actually a virus-bearing satellite put into orbit for experimental purposes related to biological warfare. He overhears that the town is expendable in their pursuit of capturing the organism alive, which they intend to do in the sewers, where it's reportedly chasing a young woman and two boys. He recognizes this as likely describing Meg, is discovered, but then manages to get away. Meg and the boys continue to look for a way out of the sewers, and Kevin manages to escape through a hole that's too small for Meg. And Eddie? Well, Eddie gets turned into poop. Flagg manages to pull Meg out, and they eventually find their way back to the surface, despite Dr. Meadows' best efforts to the contrary. They get into a standoff of conflicting interests, with no one understanding the true nature of the situation, until the Blob lets itself be heard. The soldiers do what soldiers do, which is highly impressive to the civilians, but not to the Blob. It busts out and wreaks havoc until they remember its relationship with the cold. So Flagg commandeers the town's snowmaker, but gets flipped pretty quickly, requiring Meg to lay down some cover fire from atop the freeze tank and leave behind an explosive, setting off an instant winter, crystallizing the Blob and saving Christmas forever after. We then see the good Reverend is turned into a prosperity preacher, encouraging everyone to live their best lives until the coming judgment, which is apparently scheduled for whenever he feels touched by an angel. And that was The Blob, probably one of the best remakes of a classic film there's ever been. If you enjoyed the video, I'd love for you to become a part of the channel by subscribing. Thanks for watching.